I'm Mike Uyak. I love to try new things, and I've had culinary adventures all around the world as well as right at home. I've had really wonderful food, as well as some really horrible food. I'd like to share some of my adventures with you, and we'll see if I have what it takes to fix whatever goes wrong. This is Recipe Redemption. Hi everyone, Mike Uyak here for Recipe Redemption. Today we're going to talk about this. This is Blodplattar. It's a Swedish dish, or let's see if I can get this right. In Finnish, the dish is called Asverjahukainen. I'm going to apologize right now for anyone who actually understands either of those languages. I know I just made it sound a little more Klingon than it really needed to be, but in a way, I think the Klingons would really appreciate this, because this is a blood pancake. Let's take a look at how these are made. Okay, to start our blood pancakes, I start with equal quantities by volume of blood, this is pork blood, and milk. To that, I add some rye flour. Now, the recipe I have has it by equal volume as the milk or the blood. Not 100% sure if they intended that, but I went ahead and did it anyway. To that I add a pinch of salt and about a teaspoon and a half of molasses. Grinds of black pepper and stir to combine. This mixture is now allowed to rest in the fridge for 1 hour. Melt some butter in a frying pan and fry 1 diced shallot. I'm just going to sweat this. You don't actually have to brown it at all, just until the shallot becomes translucent. About 2 to 3 minutes. Add the sweated shallots to the pancake batter and stir to combine. Melt another pat of butter in your frying pan and pour enough of the batter in to make a decent sized pancake. About a 6-inch puddle of batter. And just like any other pancake, cook on medium heat until the edges just start to set, and then you can start thinking about flipping it. Flip the pancake over and let it cook for another minute to minute and a half on the other side. Before serving, spread a layer of lingonberry jam on the pancake. Now, in working with blood, it kind of serves to understand exactly what it is that you're working with. So I took some of the congealed blood, what the Chinese and a lot of Asian cultures call blood tofu. And basically, it's blood that has been allowed to coagulate, and they actually sell them in kind of tofu like cubes. And a lot of times, what the Chinese do is just cube them up and throw them into things like soups, and or just fry a piece. So I think it's instructive to learn exactly what the ingredient itself tastes like. Vaguely porky. This is pork blood. It's vaguely porky. Um, it's a little salty. I didn't add any, but it's a little bit salty on. So if you've ever pricked your thumb or something and sucked on it, you know what blood tastes like. Surprisingly not metallic. Usually blood products end up being kind of coppery, irony, which makes sense considering how much metal is actually in blood with the hemoglobin. It's not bad. Once you get past your ick factor, it's really not that bad. No. Now that I have an idea of how the blood itself tastes like, onto the blodplattar. Now I'm going to try a little bit without the lingonberry jam. Now, mind you, this had no leavening. It's a little floppy. It has no leavening, so they don't puff up like your typical buttermilk flapjacks do. You'll also remember there was no sugar in this. These really are kind of savory buckwheat, or kind of like buckwheat blini, but they're rye. So without the lingonberry jam, this is not going to be sweet. But there is a savoriness to it. That's really good. That's surprisingly tasty. Just not a nice balance with the shallots and the salt and pepper, and sort of the rye dough. The blood actually gives it a richness that above and beyond the dairy that's in there, and adds a little bit of an umami flavor. Let's see what it's like with the lingonberry jam. It's actually quite tasty. Not surprisingly, the lingonberry jam adds a sweetness, adds a certain fruity note to it. But honestly, I don't know that it actually needs the jam, for me personally. That's just me. I tend to like savory flavors more than sweet flavors anyway. But it gets me to thinking, what other things can blood be used for? Obviously, blood sausages. The black pudding is what the English call them, but they're blood sausages. The blood bologna that I made last time needs something, but bologna is basically a big sausage, and you just slice it for cold cuts. But it is essentially a big sausage, so just like any other sausage, if it wasn't 70% filler and there was more actual blood and pork products in there, and a lot more in the way of spicing, I think it would have been better anyway. I know the Germans have something called Schwarzsauer, which is basically a blood stew. But some experimentation has been done recently with using blood to replace egg whites. I mentioned this last time. Blood has about the same amount of albumin, the protein that actually causes egg whites to foam up and stiffen when you beat them, has about the same amount of albumin as egg whites. So you can theoretically use them to replace egg whites and that may be a boon for people who can't have egg because of an allergy. You can actually have things like meringues, souffles, those sorts of things. So with that in mind, I made this. We are making a blood and blood orange souffle. So to start with, I'm going to place the juice and zest of 2 blood oranges into a small saucepan. Once the juice is heated, we're going to add sugar and cornstarch and whisk briskly to combine and make sure there aren't any lumps. Once the mixture begins to thicken, turn the heat down and add a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then set off to the side to cool. Here's where the experimental part of this recipe begins. I've placed about 1.5 cups of pork blood in the bowl of my mixer with the whisk attachment. And I'm attempting to beat them just like egg whites so that they form soft peaks. So my blood has started to foam and gotten to soft peaks, and I started to add the sugar, just sprinkling it in gradually. And there goes my foam. The foam just collapsed. I'm attempting to fix this by beating some regular egg whites until they reach a soft peak stage, and then adding some of the blood mixture back in. And hopefully the egg whites will add stability where my blood didn't have it. As you can see, it's still kind of interfering with the foam, even with the egg whites. So I think there was something wrong with the blood. But we're going to use it anyway. Next step is to grease a ramekin. I'm just going to use some butter and rub down the sides and the bottom so that it doesn't stick. And then roll sugar in there to coat all the surfaces. Next, I fold some of my blood meringue in with the blood orange mixture that I had from earlier. And just fold it in to incorporate it with and hopefully not break down too much of the foam. Pour that mixture into the ramekins and place them into a 375 Fahrenheit oven for about 10 minutes. In the meantime, with the remainder of the meringue I had, you can see the liquid on the bottom there that shows that this is separated out and broken, but I'm still going to use it. I'm adding cocoa powder. I'm going to make a chocolate version of the souffle. So lessons learned. Apparently, getting my blood supply from the Asian market, because it tends to come already coagulated in the blood tofu form, you have to do a little bit of processing to make it liquid again. And what I had read was adding acid, like some sort of vinegar to it, helps to break up those clots, for lack of a better word, to help decoagulate them, make them liquefied again. But the problem with that is I think the acid interfered in the chemical reaction that allowed stiff peaks to form when I was whipping it. So my meringue collapsed. And so my failure and realizing that should not necessarily impact our judgment of the souffle that we made. Now, obviously, not very souffle-like. It did not puff up the way that it should have. So as far as height and texture, I'm not going to judge that, just because I failed in the stiff peaks department. But as far as flavor, we're going to judge this. Now this is the blood and blood orange. That's tasty. The flavor is really good. The blood orange has a bitterness to it that kind of complements the blood in a way. But it's a strong enough flavor that you don't notice any sort of metallic flavor from the blood. And gives it that nice citrusy zing to it. Really good. Now, the other thing that I've heard that complements the flavor of blood is chocolate. So I did one with cocoa added to it. And that's basically the only difference. This one rose even less, but so the flavor of the blood does come through a little bit more in this. I don't know if maybe I needed to do more chocolate. Probably with a chocolate souffle like this, I would actually top this with a chocolate sauce. I didn't bother to do that because I wanted to taste it the way it was, unadorned, and I'm lazy. It's a little more gelatinous than I would expect of a souffle, but one, it's blood, so that may be part of it, and two, because of the collapsed egg whites, there was basically a layer of liquid that formed on the bottom that ended up boiling away. So that probably affected the final texture. The flavor's not bad, but this does kind of remind me of overcooked scrambled eggs as far as texture. And again, I can taste a little bit of that blood flavor through, which maybe you want, maybe you don't. If the idea was to cover it up, not so much. If the idea was to complement it, it's not bad. So I think we've learned a few things here today. And it's worth experimenting more in all our lives, using blood as an ingredient. It's certainly plentiful if we just start using it more. Now, for recipes like these, I do recommend actually getting your blood in liquid form. Easiest way to do it is just to hop online. There are internet purveyors who sell it frozen, and they'll ship it to you frozen. You just got to thaw it out, and you won't have these problems with it being kind of chunky and having to add acid in order to reliquefy it. I think you'll come up with a much better product in the end. But I encourage you, give it a try. Flavor-wise, it's really not that bad. It's quite inoffensive, and who knows? It may actually be a nutritious and ultimately tasty addition to your regular grocery run. So with that, I'd like to thank you for watching, and until next time, this is Mike Uyak for Recipe Redemption.